Jonathan Sinclair, CEO of one of the largest financial institutions in the state, stared into the void from his office, his heart heavy. His daughter, Ava, confined to a wheelchair for years, seemed to be fading under the weight of sterile diagnoses from the best neurologists. "I have all the money in the world, but I can't give my daughter her legs back," he murmured, his voice broken. Miles away, on a secluded farm scented with cedar and serenaded by the song of cicadas, Lucas Thorne, a former prodigy neurologist, had abandoned his career after a personal tragedy, a fatal surgical error on his sister. Once a national award winner for his research on neural stimulation, he now lived in seclusion, carving wood and tilling the land. Maria Kendall, a nurse who had known him in college, was the only one who remembered his genius. She had seen Lucas help a limping boy walk in a field with wooden braces he had made. When she spoke of him to Jonathan, a fragile hope was born. One foggy morning, a black Mercedes stopped in front of Lucas's farm. Jonathan, in a perfectly tailored suit, seemed out of place next to Lucas in a sweat-stained shirt, an axe in hand. "I don't need a doctor, but someone who still believes when everyone else gives up," Jonathan pleaded, extending an envelope. Lucas pushed it away. "I'm not a doctor." But Jonathan insisted, pulling out a photo of Ava, a laughing teenager with blonde hair, a red scarf in the wind, full of life before her accident. Lucas fixed his gaze on the image, his fingers tightening around the worn strap of his tool bag. A glimmer ignited in his eyes, a spark he hadn't felt in years. "Let me try," he murmured, not out of faith in a miracle, but because he saw in Ava the same pain he had carried. The Sinclair estate, a palace of cold marble, shone with luxury but lacked warmth. Lucas stepped down from his old pickup, observing the wrought iron gates and the imposing residence. A weary-looking nurse greeted him. "Ava knows you're coming, but she refuses to see anyone." Lucas nodded silently and followed her through corridors adorned with expensive artworks, where every surface sparkled with sterile perfection. They stopped in front of a heavy door. "She hasn't spoken in 3 months," the nurse whispered. Lucas entered alone. Ava's room, bathed in light, seemed frozen in time. Sitting in a wheelchair by the window, Ava, her shoulders slumped, avoided his gaze. Without a word, Lucas placed a smooth cedar block and a carving knife on the table beside her bed, then left the room. That evening, Ava stared at the wood, briefly touched the knife, then pushed it away. "I don't need toys," she mumbled into the void. The next day, the block remained there, untouched. Outside, Lucas worked in the garden, carving driftwood with meditative precision, shaping waves, trees, feathers. Ava watched him from the shadow of her room, intrigued despite herself by his silent patience. Days passed. She began to scribble questions on scraps of paper. "Why do you carve? What is the meaning?" Lucas didn't respond with words, but with drawings or sculptures, a hand emerging from roots, a bird on a broken branch. These silent answers irritated Ava, but awakened a buried curiosity within her. One night, a violent seizure struck her. Her muscles tensed, her breathing quickened. The panicked nurse called for help, but Lucas, alerted, grasped her hand. "Look at me. Inhale 1, 2, 3, exhale 4, 5, he said, his calm voice cutting through the chaos. Lucas did not believe in clinical miracles. His therapy began with the earth. Every morning, he took Ava to the garden behind the estate, where the air smelled of damp grass and warm soil. Her bare feet touched the wet grass. Her hands brushed against the warm sand. Lucas placed acorns in her palms, leaves against her cheeks, guiding her fingers over the rough bark of an oak tree. "This isn't about walking. It's to remind you that you can still feel, he explained. Ava's movements were slow, her hands weak, her legs numb, but her senses gradually awakened. She closed her eyes to feel the sun, breathed in the scent of cedar, even laughed softly when Lucas slipped a worm into her hand. Under the oak, they practiced simple gestures, closing her fingers around a stone, then reopening them again and again. One day, Lucas handed her a smooth piece of wood and a knife. "It doesn't have to be perfect, just yours," he said. Ava, hesitant, tried to carve a leaf. Each stroke took minutes. In the end, her hand slipped, the knife cut too deeply, splitting the leaf in two. "Of course, I ruined everything," she muttered, throwing the wood away in anger. Lucas picked it up, caressed the crack. "A split wood is not a broken wood," he replied calmly. He carved a trunk from the crack, then branches and a flower. "It grows where it breaks," he said, handing it back to her. Ava held the sculpture, the crack now part of a living piece of art. From that moment on, sculpting became their ritual. They spoke little, but the silence between them grew rich. One morning, as Lucas poured tea in the kitchen of the estate, a sudden breath interrupted him. He turned to see Ava, frozen, her eyes wide. "Lucas," she whispered, pointing to her foot. A tear slid down her cheek. "My toe, it moved." They stared at her right foot, where the second toe had contracted, barely, but undeniably. "It's me," she whispered, her voice broken with emotion. Then she burst into sobs mixed with laughter. "You're the first not to look at me as if I'm already finished." Lucas took her hand, his eyes moist, without saying a word. That simple gesture spoke more than any words could. From that day on, Ava trained with a wooden frame that Lucas had made, padded and smooth, crafted with care. Every morning, under the old oak tree, she clung to the bars, her arms trembling, her breath short. Her feet, heavy as anchors, touched the ground. Lucas never pushed her, staying by her side, a stable presence. Each day, she held on longer, her muscles whispering instead of screaming. When she wasn't training, Ava painted with her left hand, her right still clumsy. Her brush strokes, imperfect, captured moments. The light on the leaves, the curve of a smile, the shadow of a tree at dusk. She also picked up her long-abandoned journal, noting trembling phrases. "Today, I held on for 7 seconds." Lucas said nothing, but I saw the pride in his eyes. One afternoon, under the shade of the oak, she caressed a piece of bark. "My mother used to come here," she confided softly. "It was her favorite spot. She read while I danced in the grass." Her voice trembled. "She died last year, a sudden stroke. We didn't get to say goodbye. After that, everything fell apart. I thought I deserved that accident." Lucas, without responding in words, handed her a piece of wood and carved beside her. Their silence became a refuge. Later, Ava asked to be taken to the corner of the garden where her mother rested. Alone, she placed a small carved flower at the foot of the grave. On a golden afternoon, Ava took 3 trembling steps with her wooden frame, the sun illuminating her determined face. Unbeknownst to her and Lucas, someone filmed the scene. Within 24 hours, the video exploded on social media. Ava Sinclair walks again. After years in a wheelchair, a farmer defies the odds. Shares numbered in the thousands, accompanied by emotional comments. A miracle. A second chance. Major media outlets seized the story. A wooden frame and a whisper. How a reclusive farmer restored hope to a millionaire's daughter. Headlines speculated. Can it heal the spine? Reporters camped outside the Sinclair estate. Producers offered fortunes to Lucas for interviews, and a medical organization invited him to an international symposium. He declined everything. I haven't healed anyone. I helped a young woman believe in her hands. But his simplicity fueled the frenzy. A controversy quickly erupted. Dr. Leonard Reyes, a prominent neurologist from Johns Hopkins, published a scathing critique. Emotion is not a treatment. Romanticizing unvalidated methods creates false hopes. A television show posed the question, Lucas Thorne, hidden genius or manipulator in a publicity stunt? Pressure mounted on the Sinclairs. During a tense meeting, the public relations team warned Jonathan of legal and ethical risks. Ava, having become a symbol against her will, heard her father say, "This is no longer just about Ava. I can't let her become a pawn in a war against modern medicine." Hurt, Ava, who had been listening from the hallway, rolled into her office. "You're deciding for me again, just like after the accident," she shot back, her eyes blazing. "You've never asked me what I want." Jonathan, shaken, tried to respond, but she turned away. A press conference was organized to calm the storm. In a packed medical center filled with reporters and skeptical doctors, Lucas sat silently in the back. Ava, facing the crowd of reporters, continued, her voice trembling yet resolute. "When all the doctors told me what I couldn't do, Lucas asked me one question. Do you want to continue? That question saved my life." No one moved. Jonathan, his eyes filled with tears, stood up and applauded. Slowly, others followed. The cameras lowered. The pens stopped writing. It was no longer a matter of headlines or controversies, but of a young girl who had found her voice and a man who had never needed to raise his to change everything. Lucas met Ava's gaze, a silent exchange of gratitude and pride. But the media storm did not calm. Criticism, invitations, and speculation intensified, weighing on Lucas, not for himself, but for Ava, whose name had become a symbol in a debate that transcended her healing. Terrified that she would be engulfed by this frenzy, he packed his bags one morning, without ceremony, leaving a letter on the windowsill of Ava before walking away down the gravel path. Upon waking, Ava found the letter and the emptiness. She stared at the oak tree where they trained, the garden now as hollow as an abandoned room. She stopped eating, stopped talking, the light fading again from her eyes. Jonathan, helpless, watched his daughter fade away. One night, unable to sleep, Ava rolled to Lucas's workshop. Dust was settling, but the shelves still held his sculptures. A bird, a spiral, a mended, cracked heart. Then she found a block of pine engraved with 5 words. "Every scar is a seed." Her breath caught, her hands trembled. Without calling anyone, she put on her braces, grabbed her frame, and walked alone to the garden. Step by step, stubbornly, she moved across the grass until her legs gave out. She collapsed, her palms scraped on the stone path, pain radiating down her spine. Jonathan rushed over, panicked. "I'm fine," she murmured, pushing away his help. "You're not speaking for me this time." Tears flowed. "I don't want to lose the only person who saw me beyond this chair." Jonathan, shaken, promised, "We will bring him back." A few days later, a raw wooden sign appeared at the gates of the estate, engraved with the words, "I still need my farmer." Lucas, now living in a secluded cabin, stopped dead in his tracks upon seeing it. Lucas approached Ava, moved, and took her hand. "It wasn't to heal you," she murmured. "It was to relearn how to live." He gently embraced her, supporting her trembling body, and for the first time, Ava felt whole, not repaired, but alive. Every morning, she rose before dawn, stretching still painful but now familiar limbs. She walked slowly along the garden path, her canes marking her steps, each movement a silent victory. The Sinclair estate, once cold, was filling with warmth. In a sunny corner of the garden, Ava began teaching children in wheelchairs or with walkers. She knelt beside them, sometimes trembling, but always smiling. "It doesn't have to be perfect," she told a boy missing 3 fingers, teaching him to sculpt. Lucas, from a distance, watched, his face softened. He now spent his days in town, collaborating with a small rehabilitation hospital to create a sensory garden. Sculpted benches, paths to walk barefoot, wooden ramps resembling branches. Named the Grove, this space reconnected patients to their senses, to the earth, to themselves. In the evening, Lucas returned to the gardener's cottage where he lived with Ava, a simple place filled with books, sculptures, and unfinished cups of tea. They sat on the porch, fireflies dancing in the hedges. One night, under an indigo sky, Ava rested her head on his shoulder. A year later, Ava walked without a frame, her steps slow but her own. One spring day, the Sinclair family gathered for a picnic under the old oak tree, where Ava had fallen, cried, and then stood up again. The garden, in full bloom, resonated with laughter. Ava wore a simple dress, a red scarf tied her hair, the one from the photo Lucas had seen. Jonathan, sitting under the tree, looked at her with a peace he hadn't known in years. Lucas, near the grill, handled the tongs with a quiet ease. Ella, Lucas's young niece, played with wildflowers, dancing in the sun. Suddenly, she approached Ava, a wide smile on her lips. "Uncle Lucas told me to give you this," she said, opening her hand. It was a polished bark ring, adorned with a silver wire, engraved with the words, "Hope grows here." Ava, surprised, was left speechless. Lucas stepped forward and knelt before her. "I didn't make it to heal you," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You weren't broken. You're what brought me back to life. Will you marry me, Ava?" With tears in her eyes, she nodded. "You're not late," she whispered. "You arrived just in time to walk with me." Jonathan, a glass of lemonade in hand, smiled softly, murmuring to the wind, "She has found someone who truly sees her. Rest in peace, my love. Our daughter will be fine." Under the golden sun, surrounded by laughter, wood shavings, and wildflowers, a chapter closed, not in a burst of applause, but in the quiet beating of 2 hearts uniting. The Bosquet, Lucas's sensory garden, became a refuge for dozens of patients. Soft gravel paths, carefully carved benches, and plants chosen for their texture and fragrance invited visitors to slow down and feel. Doctors, initially skeptical, began sending patients, acknowledging that Lucas's approach, though unconventional, awakened deep instincts. Ava, for her part, transformed her workshop into an informal school where children and adults with disabilities learned to sculpt, paint, and tell their stories. "Every scar is a seed," she would repeat, quoting the words engraved by Lucas. Her students, often marginalized, found a new dignity in her classes. A boy, amputated of one hand, sculpted a twisted yet proud tree, which he offered to Ava with a shy smile. These moments, simple yet profound, became the true therapy. Jonathan, once absorbed his financial empire, spent more time with Ava, attending her classes, moved by her strength. He financed the expansion of the Bosquet, not out of charity, but from the conviction that hope could arise from earth and wood. The media, after the initial frenzy, calmed down, but the story of Ava and Lucas remained in people's hearts. Bloggers shared their sculptures, and local schools adopted similar workshops. Lucas, always discreet, refused interviews but accepted a meeting with a small group of curious neurologists. "This is not science. It is humanity," he explained. "You cannot heal a body without touching the soul." Ava, meanwhile, wrote in her journal, "Today I walked 20 steps without canes." But that's not the most important thing. I learned to see myself through Lucas's eyes, and that is my true victory. Their little house, nestled near the garden, became a haven where they planned their wedding, laughing over the details, a carved wooden arch, wildflowers, a ceremony under the oak tree. A year after the proposal, Ava and Lucas married under the old oak tree, surrounded by laughing children, families embraced by emotion, and wildflowers woven by Ava's students. She walked slowly toward the altar, unframed, her discreet canes in hand, each step a testament to her resilience. Lucas, in a simple suit, his eyes shining, reached out his hand to her. Their vow was simple: to walk together, always, through every storm. Jonathan, in the front row, wept softly, feeling his wife's presence in the wind. The grove thrived, becoming a community center where families came not only to heal, but to reconnect. Ava, now a full-time teacher, published a collection of poems and drawings inspired by her journey, titled "Every Scar is a Seed." The proceeds funded scholarships for the children of the grove. Lucas, for his part, trained local artisans to carve therapeutic tools, sharing his knowledge without seeking glory. Their story, relayed by storytellers on social media, inspired thousands. A mother wrote to Ava, "My son, in a wheelchair, carved a star thanks to you. He smiles again." These letters, Ava kept close to her heart, like seeds planted for a brighter future. One evening, sitting on their porch, Ava and Lucas gazed at the stars. "You taught me to live, not just to walk," she whispered. Lucas smiled, caressing the ring he had carved. "And you taught me that hope can grow anywhere, even in the cracks." Their home, filled with wood shavings and laughter, was a sanctuary where every object told a story of perseverance.